So when you're starting these animations and you're going through the motions, you're thinking about the 12 principles of animation. And one of them, which is very important, is arcs. So clean arcs on your controls and movements. Let me show my NURBS curves in here. So clean arcs along these, because when we're moving in real life, we don't just move like robots in here. We're like, you're doing flow. You have clean arcs whenever you're moving your hand. You want a really appealing fluid motion, and a lot of that is achieved through use of arcs. And one way to visualize those better in Maya is if you click on a control that you're curious about if it's moving smoothly or not. So, and applying what they call a motion trail to it. So if you have, for instance, I find that when I'm animating, since you do that first pass on the hips, right? As you go further into the animation, you might notice that the upper torso is a little bit jittery because all those controls are being rotated from that first point, and it might get a little bit poppy and unclean. So what I like to do is I like to click that top control in there. I'm just going to click that top torso. And if I go to my animation menu in here, in my drop downs, animation, and if I go to visualize, and one of the options in here is create editable motion trail. And so if I click that, keep in mind that this is a little bit of an intensive operation for Maya. So if I click that, it's gonna go in here and create that for me. So now it has this spline going through my scene, and you can see exactly how that object is moving along each keyframe. So if I go in here, you can see as I get to this spinning section, as I advance the keys, you can see that they're being drawn like that. And you can see that it goes along that curve. And this is helpful for diagnosing if you're seeing some poppiness. It'll help you see that curve in there. And what you can do is click on the controls under it as well, and if you start pulling these around, I'm not going to say this is going to look better because obviously do that, but look at how that motion trail was updating. So it now, wait a minute, I have to update that and then update the torso control. So if we start moving these around, I'm just going to do it outside of the graph editor. Notice how it's dragging along that point. Let me zoom in so you guys can see it better. We're just going to start updating that point at each section. If I go back to frame 72, and I update it, notice how you can see how it's interpolating into that point. So this is good for diagnosing when you have kind of jittery animation, and you can really do this on. Let me select this. So I'm just gonna select this control right here, and I'm just gonna press delete. It's not gonna delete my animation or anything. It's just that it's deleting that visualization of that curve. What it's good for though is messing with arms as well, or IK arms. If you have that as well, you can go in and visualize, create an editable motion trail for this. It doesn't work as well on FK, which I'm in right now, because these points only track translation and not rotation. But you can see how this sort of sword slash right there goes along this kind of clean arc. It is jagged just because that's where that's each frame. Like this object's going very fast, right? So each frame it's advancing. You can see even on the jagged nature of it. You can see the spacing of it. The like another another one of the 12 principles. You can see that the spacing between the keys is getting faster and faster into that huge motion of the swing. And yeah, so this is pretty useful for diagnosing that type of stuff. And I figured you would want to know about it. But yeah, so let's delete that out of the scene. So yeah, that's editable motion trails. Mostly useful for translating, because then you can even go in, and if I create one on an IK control, like the waist, you can go in and drag these points to be in different spots. Like, so if I want this jump to be even higher, I can just straight up drag all right, it was a bit too much there. Oh, and this is what I'm talking about it being a very intensive operation. Like, Maya has frozen up. But my God, 1 second. My computer's sweating. I can hear it. I can hear it sweating in the background. I might just close my eye, honestly. That was wild. But yeah, so you can drag those points around, and it will update that point along the chart. And also, I'm just going to close Maya because this is insane. Oh God. Zoom, no. Zoom's power usage is very high. I don't like that. Boom. All right. So there we go. Let me pop open another Maya. But yeah, so that's editable motion trails. They're pretty useful, but it's kind of for more of the polish section. But yeah, as you saw on my version, it is pretty heavy when you're using it. So maybe don't use it all the time, because if your computer is like a little bit on the slower side. But yeah, so then also in here is also what I'm going to be going over is kind of working with different props, or just props in general, not different props. 1 second, I'm still opening up. Okay, so let me go in to there we go. Sorry, I heard Discord updates. I was making sure it wasn't a class, a student. And they, all right, so if I open up this walk, let's see. Let's make sure this file is not scuffed or anything. Do you want us to have the props also painted and textured? No, if you, in fact, prop animation it's not required at all. I'm just doing this in case anyone out there has a scene in which they have a prop that they want to control, right? So don't worry about going overboard with props or anything. It's completely optional. This is just for if you are animating with them, you know. So we have this walk cycle in here, and say we want this guy to have a club of some sort. So if I create a sphere, or not a sphere, a cylinder, and then just size this down, and let me drag this over to the other plane, or to the other window, multi-cut, and yeah. So if I just give him some sort of simple club, and if I want this to animate with him, it would be a pain for me to go in every frame, like say frame 1, I'm like, okay, this has to go into his hand. Okay, there it is. Perfect. And then frame 2, oh, let me set that key. Then frame 2, oh no, he moved a little bit. Oh God, I need to fix that too. Like, this is just insane, right? That's completely, like, you will go insane if you try to animate like that, right? So what I'm going to go over is constraints, and we've used constraints before in rigging, but we can also use them in animation. So if I delete this key, I'm going to delete this key as well, and I'm just going to I'm going to set this up so it's a little bit easier to work with. So I'm going to zero out all these, and I'm going to modify freeze transformations just so I know all of my channel boxes all zeroed out. I know this is probably super tiny. Oh, it's because I accidentally opened up Maya 2017 instead of 2019, and it doesn't like 4K monitors as much, so it'll be pretty small to see. But don't worry. So if you have a prop, it's always a good idea to have it be under some other control in the hierarchy. So if I go into create, and then if I go to, you can either do a locator, which is this thing right here. It's always this like weird pointy looking thing. This is what I normally use, but if you want to get a little fancy, you can go in, create NURB primitive, then do a circle. And if I scale that down, or if I grab the, I'm gonna grab the control vertices and scale that down. That way I don't have to freeze my transforms again. But yeah, so if I grab this, now it looks like a good controllable size for the weapon here. If I move this up, or if I just get both of these, right? It's almost like I'm gonna be creating like a tiny rig, you know? So if I move this prop up to be up to where I'm gonna kind of hold it, I can go in and do select the child, which is this. Like I want this control to move the club around. So select the child and then the parent and press P. So now that moves around as a child of this object. And the reason we do that instead of a constraint is because now we can key this object in here. And I'm going to move the pivot point using D. I'm gonna hold D and X to move that pivot point. So now I can move this around and rotate this in there. So it's gonna be nice to get like different posing in there. And now I'm going to constrain this control right here to the hand. And I can either straight up go in here and just pose it into whatever pose I want, and then place it in the hand. And then constrain it. And to do that, we would just go to your constrain menus up here at the top. And if you're in animation, it'll be up here. But you have to be in the right drag down. It'll be in both rigging and animation, but since we're in the animation portion, I'll stay in animation. And you can just click the instead of child then parent for regular parenting in the hierarchy, this is parent constraint. So it's really dumb that Maya's done it this way. I'm going to be the first to say that because they absolutely messed up their selection order. So for regular parenting, in which stuff is just put under, in which objects are put under other objects. Let me just visualize that for you a little bit better. Actually, let me drag Maya to the other screen because this is like super low res. Let's see if this is. Let me do this real quick. Outliner, reference editor, get out of here. Oh, no, okay. And then let me share the other screen. You share screen 1. Let's share that bad boy. Okay, so hopefully you guys can see this better. Are you able to see this better at all, guys? Like, are the numbers a little bit more visible? Because I know it was super tiny on that last one. Visible. Oh yeah. Okay. So what I did with this club, just to reiterate, let me close the second outliner, was I parented this this club shape, like the actual geometry, to this circle in here. So when I move this circle, the club moves. And in the hierarchy, in the outliner, you can find it by going to Windows, Outliner, or Windows Outliner up here, either one. You'll see that I have that NURB controller, this one right there, as higher up in the hierarchy than the cylinder shape. So now when I move that, it's moving the cylinder. So that's regular parenting. And what we're going to do now is parent constrain this control to this wrist. Now, what I was saying before was that it's the exact opposite selection order. So if I bring this out of this hierarchy, and you can do that by clicking this child and then doing Shift plus P. So it's just that. So now this is no longer controlling it. But if you can also just middle click drag in here too. That might be a little bit easier to kind of visualize, but the regular selection order is the child and then the parent. And P, so that's for regular parenting, but for constraining right here, so if I want to constrain this curve to the wrist, if I go to the selection order will be the driver and then the driven. So it's the exact opposite of parent constraining. It's of regular parenting, and it's so dumb that they did that, and it makes me angry every time I have to do it, but that's what we have nonetheless. So if I go up to here to constrain, you can see that you have a bunch of different constraint possibilities in here, but I'm going to do parent. So now this circle is constrained to that wrist control, and you can tell by when I click on this control, these all highlight pink. So this curve, this NURB curve, highlights pink. So it's being parent constrained to that wrist. And so now, when he moves around, you can see that the club goes with him. And I would have to obviously change the hand posing to make it look like he's actually gripping onto that, you know. But since we have this little hierarchy in here, having that prop under the curve, we can now set different keys on this thing. So we can key this a little bit out. If we want, we could give it a little bit of overlap. So if I go into the side view, I can key in some overlap here. So I'll have it just a few frames after that and kind of drag behind. And keep doing that to get a little bit more naturalistic movement on there. Right here. Remove this zoom window. So yeah, so you can see that it has just a little bit more drag than this second one has no overlap keyed into it. So it's just 1-to-1 ratio, like a 1-to-1 relationship between the two. But yeah, this one has a little bit of overlap. It looks a little bit nicer, a little bit smoother of an arc there. So that's why I have that little hierarchy in there. But say now he throws it or something. Like or not throws it, he just lets go of it. So I need to kind of have this first control move, like if I try to key this child control to be like, okay, so here he's gonna, on this frame he drops it, on frame 16 he drops it, so I'm gonna need to key this out here. Then you'll notice that it's still being dragged like that, so you're counter animating this. So what you actually want is just the control to not be influenced at all by that constraint, right? So in reality, what we should do is bake that constraint down. So if I go in here and click on this constrained object, and if I go to key, and where is it? Bake animation. Now you'll see a bunch of keys popped up in the timeline. Now all of these have like red little markers to see, to let you know that they've been keyed, and all of these channels are highlighted in that deep red in the channel box in the top right. So you know that they're being keyed there. So now if I go in and I delete this parent constraint in the hierarchy in my outliner, so if I delete this parent constraint, you'll notice that the object stays there, and it still has all that animation in it because we baked down that animation. So now on frame 16, instead of having all these subsequent frames of him, still holding it, if we go in and just select over these, then right click, delete, you'll see that it's no longer in there. And I'm going to make sure that my child object doesn't have any keys on it either, just because you can see that it stops, that first control stops, but then the kind of bowling pin shape keeps moving, and it kind of lands there. So I want it to just everything to stop on frame 16. Boom. So right there. So that's what's happening now. And then we can kind of just key the rest of the path of that object. So we go in here and kind of just set a key there. It's a little bit too far away, too fast. And then just let this hit the floor. And it's a little bit too fast, but I'm not going to polish this animation up, but tangents linear, simple stuff. So yeah, that's how you deal with objects like that within Maya. That's how you do it within Maya, like in the default tools. What I do though is I have this plugin called Red9. It's a weird name, but it's just RED, no space, 9. And when I click on my little script button, it pops it up in there. And it has an animation toolkit, which is like, whenever I'm doing prop animation, because it's, kind of a little bit more complex, you can do just like, you can do really nice, fast sort of that same process, but without having to do the parent constraint. You can just have it follow the object. So if I went in here and I wanted it to follow the hand, just go in here, do that same driver then driven selection, and you can highlight on your toolbar or on your timeline down here. If you're still in that animation menu, you can shift and then select. Oh, it's probably, one second, let me delete these keys in here just so you can see all of what it's able to do. So there's no more pre-built animation on there. Let me delete the keys on here as well. So if I do that same driver then driven and then select on my timeline, I can just do a track, and it's called tracking and stabilizing. And you can just do it with only the translate, or the translate and the rotate, or only the rotate. So it's really nice in that respect. But see how it tracked only up to frame 18, and now all that animation is just on there instead. and I can go in and change any of these keys because it's not constrained. It did it without the constraint. So if you're looking for if you're going to be doing a lot of prop animation in the future, I would 100% suggest using Red 9. Otherwise, go with that constraint method and baking down the constraints and all that. It'll be really helpful for you guys. So you'll save a lot of time that way. But yeah, so that's basically it for the lecture part of the day. So now feel free to bombard me with questions about this stuff. Next class, I'm going to go over some rendering type stuff. So it's completely optional because I removed it from this this course because we're doing it online and not everyone has amazing computers or anything. And it's pretty much the most computer intensive part of Maya because it's going to be shooting a bunch of light rays into your scene. So I want to go over that briefly next class. So if you have a decent computer and aren't and it's not struggling to run Maya really, then it'd be nice to see some of these renders in your final film, but or your final reel. But don't think that it's like something that's necessary. But yeah, it'll be really cool because you get like a pretty polished kind of image of your character, and it's, I don't know, it's nice to see like a really clean render of your character after all this time. For running the arcs from the graph into the world, is it possible to render only a specific part of the timeline? No, it pretty much does the timeline in there. Let me see if there's any extra options in the yeah, it'll only do I can share my screen again. Share screen 1, share. Pretty much only has options for either the start and end. So like this outermost number and this outermost number right here. Like my max frame range for this scene is 1 to 44. But it also has time slider. So if you adjusted this, then the motion trail would only go from the mid to max. You could theoretically go, or you could go in here in this this time range right here, this start and end, and select certain frames that you could do there. So that would be a way of doing it, actually, I guess. But I don't know. I usually just leave it on for the whole scene because this is normally done towards the end of like the scene, and towards the end of your animation process, and you just need to work out some kinks in there. So I usually just leave it on for the full scene, and then just modulate that stuff. What if I have a prop that I'd like to throw? Do I still have to do the parent-child constraint? To get the most clean results, it depends on how long it's in their hand, because like if you want to have it track that hand nicely, then a constraint will really help with that. But if not, then you might need to wait. Let me stop recording.